10 years ago, Americans believed in a simple promise. Prices would stabilize, interest rates would stay low, and home ownership would become accessible again. The financial crisis had passed. The recovery was underway. For millions of people, this meant one thing: it was finally their time to buy, to invest, to secure the American dream that felt like it had slipped through their fingers. But something went wrong. Not in the way you'd expect. Not with a crash or a collapse. Instead, something far more insidious happened. The markets did exactly what they were supposed to do. The economy recovered. Interest rates stayed historically low for a while. And yet, for the average American household, housing became more out of reach than at almost any point in modern history. Today, nearly 40 million American households are spending more than 30% of their income on rent or mortgage payments. For millions more, that number is pushing 50%. These aren't statistics that belong in some obscure economic report. These are your neighbors. These are your co-workers. These are people doing everything right: stable jobs, decent incomes, savings, and still finding themselves locked out of the market or trapped in homes they can barely afford. The question isn't whether housing became expensive. The question is, how did we get here? And more importantly, why does it feel like the system is designed to keep people struggling? The promise that shaped a generation. To understand what happened, you need to go back to what people believed just a decade ago. The 2008 financial crisis had devastated the housing market. Foreclosures skyrocketed, families lost homes, the entire system seemed to be collapsing. But by 2014, 2015, and into the early 2020s, the narrative flipped. The Federal Reserve kept interest rates near zero, banks started lending again, home prices began recovering, and across America there was a collective exhale. This was the moment. The prices had bottomed out. Interest rates were at historic lows. Anyone who had been waiting, saving money, building credit, planning their future, believed this was their window. Buy now, before prices go up any further. Lock in these incredible rates before they rise. Build equity instead of paying rent to a landlord. Millions of families made this calculation and jumped in. But here's what they didn't account for. Everyone else was thinking exactly the same thing. The years between 2012 and 2019 saw a massive surge in home buying demand. Young families who had delayed purchases during the recession finally felt comfortable enough to buy. Investors who had made fortunes during the crisis started acquiring rental properties. Foreign money flowed into real estate as a safe investment vehicle. Tech workers moving to coastal cities in search of opportunity pushed prices higher. Millennials, reaching peak earning years, entered the market en masse. The demand was real. The urgency was real. The belief that prices could only go up was real. And housing supply, it stayed stubbornly flat. How a problem became a crisis. This is where the story takes a darker turn, because the supply shortage wasn't an accident. It was structural. After 2008, many home builders went out of business. Those who survived became cautious. They didn't want to repeat the boom-bust cycle. Meanwhile, local zoning regulations, the rules that dictate what can be built where, remained restrictive across most American cities and suburbs. Want to build affordable apartments? Zoning often prohibited it. Want to build denser housing? Communities fought it. Want to build quickly? Environmental reviews and permitting delays stretched timelines to years. Essentially, just when America needed a massive increase in housing supply to meet surging demand, the system was designed to prevent exactly that. The result was inevitable: prices disconnected from reality. In 2012, the median home price in America was around $180,000. By 2021, it had climbed to $350,000. Some markets were even more extreme. Austin went from a relatively affordable city to a place where a modest home costs over $500,000. Denver, Nashville, Phoenix, cities people moved to because they were cheaper, suddenly weren't cheap anymore. The escape valve that had existed for decades was closing. Then, in 2022, everything accelerated in the worst possible way. The Federal Reserve, facing inflation that had spiraled out of control, did what central banks do. They raised interest rates aggressively. Rates that had been at 2% climbed to 3%, then 4%, then 5%, then 7%. By early 2023, mortgage rates had hit levels not seen in 20 years. For someone buying a $400,000 home, the difference between a 3% rate and a 7% rate meant an extra $800 a month in payments. That's nearly $10,000 a year. For a working family already stretched thin, that difference meant the difference between qualifying for a mortgage and being locked out entirely. But here's where it gets worse, and this is the part that's reshaping America right now. The trap nobody saw coming. Once you locked in a low mortgage rate, you had every incentive to stay in that home. Not because you loved it or because it made financial sense, but because selling meant giving up your rate. Someone with a 3% mortgage on a $300,000 home has a monthly payment of around $1,265. If they sold and had to take out a new mortgage at 7% on the same home, their payment would jump to over $1,995. That's an extra $730 a month. That's not sustainable for most people. So millions of homeowners, people who might otherwise be selling, moving, downsizing, or relocating for better opportunities, stayed put. They became anchored to their homes, not by choice, but by mathematics. This sounds like it's just a personal problem, but it has massive consequences for the entire housing market. When people don't move, inventory disappears. When inventory disappears, prices for available homes stay artificially high. When prices stay high and interest rates are high, new buyers are priced out or locked out. When new buyers can't buy, rentals become their only option. And when millions of people are forced to rent instead of buy, landlords realize they can charge more. Rents skyrocket. Today, renters across America are facing the same crisis homeowners faced during the pandemic. The median rent in major cities has increased 30, 40, sometimes 50% in just 4 or 5 years. For someone making $50,000 a year, watching their rent jump from $1,200 to $2,800 isn't an inconvenience, it's a threat to their survival. And the cruelest part? Renters have no way out. They can't wait for interest rates to fall and buy. They can't lock in a low rate. They're caught in a market where landlords have all the power, and the incentive structure has shifted completely against them. Who's really paying the price? Let's talk about what this looks like in real life. Because the statistics only tell part of the story. Sarah is 42, works in healthcare administration, makes a solid middle-class income. She's been renting in Denver for 3 years. Her rent started at $1,400. It's now $1,900. She has some savings she wants to buy. But homes in her area start at $450,000. With current mortgage rates, her monthly payment would be nearly $3,200 before property taxes and insurance. She makes about $4,800 a month. That math doesn't work. So she stays in the rental market, hoping rates will fall. Meanwhile, her landlord is thrilled with the returns he's getting. Then there's Michael, a 58-year-old who bought his home in 2009 at the bottom of the market for $280,000. His mortgage is locked at 3.5%. His payment is about $1,250 a month. He's thinking about retiring in a few years, but his pension isn't as robust as he'd hoped. He could sell his home, pocket the equity, and downsize. A smaller condo in his area might be $350,000. But at 7% rates, his payment would jump to $2,130 a month. He can't afford it. So he stays in his 4-bedroom home, the one that's too big for him, just because the math doesn't allow for anything else. And then there's the millennial couple, both professionals, combined income of $130,000. They're both working, they're saving aggressively, they're doing everything they're supposed to do. They want to buy a starter home, but starter homes in their city are $550,000 to $600,000. At 7%, they're looking at $3,800 to $4,000 a month just for the mortgage. Add property taxes, insurance, HOA fees, and they're pushing $5,000 a month. That's more than they spend on everything else combined. So they don't buy, they rent, they postpone starting a family. They look at moving to another state, another region, another city, anywhere the math might work. These aren't edge cases. These are the stories playing out in neighborhoods across America. Families are making decisions they never thought they'd make, moving away from family and friends to find affordable housing. Staying in bad living situations because moving is financially impossible. Delaying marriages, children, and major life purchases. Renting indefinitely when they wanted to build equity and wealth. The American dream of homeownership. The idea that if you work hard and save money, you can own your piece of the country, is being fundamentally altered for an entire generation. The hidden mechanism nobody talks about. Here's something that economists have started documenting, and it's profoundly important. When home ownership becomes unaffordable, it doesn't just create housing problems, it creates economic problems. A homeowner building equity month after month has a financial cushion. If you lose your job, you have that equity to draw on. If you face a medical emergency, you can tap home equity. If you want to invest in education or start a business, you have collateral. Home ownership isn't just shelter. It's the primary mechanism through which ordinary Americans build generational wealth. Renters don't have that. Every dollar they pay goes to a landlord. They build no equity. They have no collateral. If they face financial hardship, they have nowhere to turn. This isn't just about comfort. It's about economic mobility and stability. When millions of people are locked out of home ownership, we're looking at a fundamental shift in how wealth builds in this country. The gap between the haves and have-nots doesn't just widen, it accelerates, and it becomes hereditary. Parents who own homes can help their children buy. Parents who rent can't. We're also seeing something else, a sorting of America by geography. Expensive cities are increasingly becoming cities for the wealthy only. Working-class people are being pushed out. They're moving to smaller cities, rural areas, red states with lower costs of living. This creates political sorting, cultural division, and regional economic inequality. Austin brought in hundreds of thousands of tech workers. Housing became unaffordable. Service workers, teachers, nurses, waiters, construction workers were pushed out to distant suburbs or to other states entirely. The city transformed. So did the political character of surrounding areas. This pattern is repeating in cities across the nation. Housing isn't just economics. It's reshaping American politics, culture, and demographics. The rate lock trap. Nobody predicted. Here's something that might surprise you. Economists are now studying something called the mortgage rate lock-in effect, and it's becoming a major concern for economic flexibility. In a normal market, when conditions change, people respond. If interest rates rise, some people hold off on buying, others might sell. The market adjusts. But when millions of people are locked into 3% mortgages while new rates are at 7%, they don't move. They can't move. The economics forbid. This means the housing market has become sticky in a way it's never been before. Homes that would normally be on the market site occupied. Inventory stays artificially low. Prices stay artificially high. New buyers face an impossible market. Renters face skyrocketing costs. The Federal Reserve might lower interest rates in the future. But even if rates drop back to 4 or 5%, people with 3% mortgages still won't want to move. The incentive to stay locked in place persists. What this creates is a kind of economic gridlock. People can't relocate for better jobs. Families can't downsize when they should. The market loses its natural adjustment mechanisms, and younger people trying to enter the market face competition from older, wealthier people who are never going to leave. What changed and why it matters now? The irony of the current housing crisis is that it emerged not from collapse but from recovery and low rates. The very policy designed to help people, keeping interest rates near zero, eventually made things worse. Between 2008 and 2021, the Federal Reserve's low interest rate policy was intentional. It was meant to stimulate the economy, help people, refinance debt, and encourage borrowing and investment. For a while it worked. The economy recovered, jobs came back. but it also supercharged demand for housing at the exact moment when supply was constrained. Then inflation became a problem. Prices started rising across the economy. The Fed responded by raising rates aggressively. The goal was to cool inflation. It worked. Inflation came down. But the cost was that suddenly, housing became even more unaffordable for new buyers, and millions of existing homeowners realized they were trapped by their own mortgages. Nobody planned this. It wasn't some conspiracy or intentional harm. It was the unintended consequence of policy decisions made under different circumstances, combined with structural housing shortages that nobody effectively addressed. The surprising insight: it's not uniform. Here's something that complicates the narrative. Housing affordability is not equally bad everywhere. If you live in Birmingham, Alabama, Fargo, North Dakota, or Des Moines, Iowa, housing is still relatively affordable. A decent home costs $300,000 to $400,000. At 7% rates, that's manageable for middle-class households. Jobs exist. Communities are stable. Schools are okay. But these cities lack something that expensive cities have: the jobs and opportunities that pull in ambitious people. A software engineer can make $150,000 in San Francisco or Austin. In Fargo, they might make $80,000. A young professional might prefer the opportunity of an expensive city, even if it means renting indefinitely, to the affordability of a smaller city with fewer possibilities. This creates a sorting, ambitious people cluster. In expensive cities and rent, older people, retirees, and people with less competitive earning power move to affordable regions and buy. The middle is shrinking. The young migrate to opportunity and accept housing precarity. The old migrate to affordability and stability. This isn't necessarily bad. Some people find this arrangement works for them. But it does mean America is becoming increasingly divided by geography in ways it hasn't been before. What to watch and why? So what should you be paying attention to? First, interest rate trajectories. If the Federal Reserve starts cutting rates meaningfully, some of the pressure might ease. But even a drop to 5% still leaves new buyers at a disadvantage compared to people locked at 3%. The rate lock-in effect will persist for years. Second, housing starts and construction. If building increases significantly, if we see a major push to change zoning and increase supply, that could bring prices down. But that requires political will at local levels, and local governments are often resistant. Watch for cities that are actually building. They're your early indicators. Third, migration patterns. Where are people moving? Are they leaving expensive cities in large numbers? Are they going to affordable regions, or are they bunching up in slightly cheaper expensive cities? Migration patterns tell you where the pressure points are. Fourth, rental costs. If rents stabilize or fall, it signals that supply is increasing or demand is cooling. Rising rents signal the opposite. Rents are a real-time indicator of housing market stress. Fifth, the generational divide. Older homeowners with low rates are in good shape. Younger renters are struggling. This is creating political and cultural divides. Pay attention to which politicians and policies are actually addressing affordability and which are just talking about it. The bottom line: housing was supposed to get better after 2008. The crisis passed. The economy recovered. Interest rates fell. Demand surged. By all the traditional metrics, the housing market should have normalized. Instead, something worse happened. A market that was already tight became a stranglehold. A policy designed to help people created incentives that trapped millions in place. A generation that did everything right, saved money, built credit, pursued education, found themselves locked out of the one investment that builds wealth. This isn't a temporary problem. This is a structural change in how America works. Millions of people are rethinking their lives around housing, where they live, whether they can afford to start a family, whether they should stay in their hometown or relocate to find opportunity, whether they should be renters indefinitely or try harder to buy at prices that feel insane. These aren't small personal decisions. They're transforming neighborhoods, reshaping cities, and redefining what the American dream looks like for an entire generation. The crisis isn't coming, it's already here. It's just distributed across millions of individual decisions and quiet struggles that don't make headlines. And until something changes, either supply increases dramatically or interest rates fall substantially, or both, millions of Americans will continue waking up realizing that the one thing they thought they could count on, the thing their parents could rely on, is now almost out of reach.